The night was electric, charged with anticipation and the roar of thousands of voices. The North Side Coliseum in Fort Worth, Texas, was a cauldron of excitement, and the air was thick with the scent of sweat, perfume, and teenage dreams. It was April 20th, 1956, and the stage was set for a phenomenon that would change the world of music forever. Elvis Presley, a 21-year-old truck driver turned rock and roll sensation, was about to take the stage. The crowd, mostly teenage girls, was already in a frenzy. They screamed, cried, and clung to each other, their eyes wide with anticipation. The local cops, overwhelmed and clueless, stood by helplessly, unable to control the mob. As the lights dimmed, a hushed silence fell over the crowd. Then a single spotlight cut through the darkness, and there he was, Elvis, with his pompadour and sideburns, strutting onto the stage like he owned the world. The audience erupted into a deafening roar. Girls fainted, tears streamed down faces, and arms stretched out in a desperate plea for a glimpse of their idol. Elvis didn't waste a moment. He launched into Let's Play House, his guitar strumming the first chords that would send the crowd into a frenzy. His hips began to move in a way that was both hypnotic and scandalous. The girls screamed louder, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony of adoration. "Elvis, I'm going to die," one girl shouted, her eyes wide with ecstasy. "She didn't die, but she might as well have been in another world." "Elvis, I'm going to faint," another girl threatened, her hands clutching her chest. She almost did, but the adrenaline kept her standing. Elvis closed his eyes and let the music take over. His body moved with the rhythm, and the girls swayed with him, their faces contorted with pure, unadulterated joy. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare or a dream, depending on your perspective. The police, who had never seen anything like it, watched in awe and envy. If only they could bottle that power and use it to control crowds. But this was something special, something that couldn't be tamed or controlled. The show continued with Elvis performing hit after hit: Heartbreak Hotel, Blue Suede Shoes, Long Tall Sally. Each song sent the crowd into a new spiral of hysteria. A 3-year-old boy in the front row even mimicked Elvis, strumming a child's guitar and swaying along with the star. Earl Lloyd Bright Jr., dressed in a tiny suit, clapped his hands and sang along, while his 20-month-old sister, Laura, sucked on her bottle and smiled. But behind the scenes, Elvis was a different person. He was polite, well-mannered, and humble. He said "sir" to every question, and spoke about his success with a sense of wonder. Just 2 years ago, he was driving a truck in Memphis, earning $35 a week. Now he was a millionaire, with a 7-year contract with Paramount Pictures and a tour that would take him to Las Vegas and beyond. The night dragged on, and the crowd's energy never waned. When Elvis finally left the stage, the fans were left in a state of shock and disbelief. They had just witnessed something that would be etched in their memories forever. Elvis and his entourage made a quick exit, slipping out of the Coliseum and into the night. The streets of Fort Worth were still alive with the echo of screams and the sound of car engines revving. The fans, still buzzing with excitement, began their search for the elusive king of rock and roll. Some followed the tour bus, others scoured the hotels, and a few even broke into the Stoneleigh, where Elvis was rumored to be staying. But for now, Elvis was safe, hidden away from the chaos he had just created. He was a man who had the world at his feet, but he knew that the road ahead would be just as challenging as the one he had already traveled. The night was just beginning, and the world would never be the same. Elvis and Nick Adams were walking down a hallway when they almost tripped over a couple. A lawyer stepped forward and introduced himself. He told Elvis that a girl wanted to see him. The lawyer was about to show a pair of Cotton Bowl tickets with lipstick marks on them, but Elvis decided to settle out of court instead. "Come on in," the lawyer said, and the couple followed. They all chatted for about an hour. When it was time for ice cream, the lawyer and his girlfriend stood up. As they left, the girlfriend grabbed the doorframe and asked Elvis for an autograph. "I'll give you something better," Elvis said and kissed her. She was so dazed that she forgot to get the autograph. The next day, Elvis and his friends were in Fort Worth for the Cotton Bowl. Reporters were excited because a deputy sheriff was trying to serve Elvis a summons. The papers accused Elvis of breaking a contract with R.G. McElligott, who said Elvis didn't play a promised show in Fort Worth. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, organized all the concert dates, and Elvis only knew where to play when Parker told him. A car with a police escort arrived, and a deputy sheriff named W.R. Pike was waiting. A man in a green jacket got out of the car and Pike pounced. But it was Gene Smith, Elvis's bodyguard, not Elvis. Gene refused the summons because it wasn't for him. Gene and Nick Adams hurried down the tunnel, and Pike chased after them, thinking Nick was Elvis in disguise. Pike then saw Elvis and tried to give him the papers, but they fell to the ground. Parker took Pike away to sort things out, and Elvis went on with the show. Parker later told the North Side Coliseum that Elvis would play 2 more shows in Fort Worth before December, as they had agreed. But Elvis's popularity grew so fast that playing in Fort Worth again would mean losing money. Parker ended up buying out the contract, just like he did with the Louisiana Hayride. Elvis's fans were so excited that his parents wouldn't let him swim in pools during the summer, because they were afraid he might get polio. But in April 1955, Dr. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine was released, and everyone was relieved. Kenneth Moore, who worked at the North Side Coliseum, talked about how closely guarded Elvis was. "He's like a caged tiger sometimes," Moore said. Elvis had to be protected from his fans or he might get hurt. He was always registered at hotels under a fake name, and police were posted outside his room. Elvis used back elevators and police cars to avoid being mobbed. He hated the word bodyguard and called them traveling companions. Despite all the secrecy, news of Elvis's whereabouts always leaked out. "Those teenagers have an espionage system that the FBI should take lessons from," Moore joked. Elvis sometimes got nervous and just wanted to walk around, but it was too dangerous. Moore tried to set a date for Elvis to come back to Fort Worth, but it kept getting pushed back. Elvis was going to be on the Ed Sullivan Show in January, and then start filming his second movie. If the Army didn't need him, he might come to Fort Worth in the spring. In June 1955, Elvis was a minor act at the North Side Coliseum. By January 1956, he was the star and his fans went wild. In less than a year, Elvis became a sensation. Old people saw him as a troublemaker, but young people adored him. The next day, Elvis and Nick Adams went for a drive to Waco. They stopped at an Army-Navy store, but it didn't have the bright colors Elvis liked. They ended up at the Midway Cafe for some chili. An Oak Cliff reporter showed up and took some photos. The restaurant filled with curious people, and a photographer from a nearby studio asked Elvis to pose. After finishing his chili, Elvis went next door for the photo shoot. He forgot about the photo, but his friend Eddie Faddle remembered and got the negatives and prints. When Elvis saw the photo at the Faddle house years later, he signed it and said it was his favorite. In October 1956, Kay Wheeler, a 15-year-old girl in Dallas, heard Elvis on the radio and decided to start the National Elvis Presley Fan Club. She used pink stationery and convinced other fan clubs to join hers. She got the DJ at Cliff Radio to play Heartbreak Hotel nonstop, and the fan club grew quickly. When Colonel Parker heard about it, he saw the potential and supported her. Kay's fan club became a big part of Elvis's success. Kay was thrilled when Colonel Parker called, inviting her to the April 15th, 1956, show in San Antonio and the April 20th show in Fort Worth. It wasn't just any invitation. Parker promised her access to Elvis's dressing room, of course, with a chaperone. She accepted politely and then hung up, shrieking with excitement. Her idol, Elvis, had become a national icon. The crowds that pressed against the barricades as she walked by proved that many shared her obsession. It felt good to be validated. When Kay arrived at each auditorium, Parker had already left the necessary passes to get her through the checkpoints. It felt like walking through East Berlin, but she waltzed past the frenzied fans, feeling like Queen Elizabeth during her coronation. The club card definitely had its perks. By the October 1956 shows, Kay's hard work paid off. She was granted special passes to meet Elvis at the Dallas Cotton Bowl performance. She could bring anyone she wanted, and she invited her family, who were all big Elvis fans. Her mother even brought a painting of Elvis she had done as a present. They marched past the police barricades and into the dressing room. News reporters had to compete with the fans, throwing their questions over the heads of excited girls. One day, Channel 5 in Fort Worth tagged Kay as a prospect and interviewed her about the Cotton Bowl show. They followed her closely, hoping to catch a secret meeting with Elvis. Instead, she led them to the Park City's Lions Club, where she explained the rock and roll phenomenon to a group of older ladies over tea. Waco was a different story. After the riotous Cotton Bowl performance, Kay found the Waco audience surprisingly calm. They clapped and yelled Elvis's name, but no one threw themselves in front of cars or carved his name into their arms. No one got arrested, and no one tried to rip off Elvis's clothes. Kay was furious. She told a reporter that Waco was the squarest town in America, and that they should feel honored to have the king perform there. The Associated Press picked up the interview, and Kay's 15 minutes of fame extended for a week. The next day, Tom Diskin, Parker's right-hand man, pounded on her door. The colonel was angry. He wanted Kay to retract her statement and apologize, saying she had been misquoted or had a case of early-onset Tourette's syndrome. Kay stood her ground, saying, "I will not. Parker doesn't own me." Parker's reaction was never documented, but it was probably best that way. Despite the time it took and the jealous boyfriends, Kay continued to organize star-struck teens into a national force. She often acted as an official spokesperson, always responding in a demure style that amused the Waco newspaper. When a reporter suggested that maybe Elvis's popularity was dying, Kay replied, "Elvis will last as long as there are women around." Kay's club had a big boost when she wrote an article for a movie magazine titled, "I Flipped Over Elvis." She received 1,000 letters a week after the article, and 500 a week after that. She had 10,000 club members, 4,000 in Houston alone. But she didn't have a club in Waco, and she was determined to change that. In Houston, the Sam Houston Coliseum was packed with 8,000 screaming fans. The show started with 6 variety acts to warm up the crowd. When Elvis finally appeared, the screams were deafening. He had to pause 3 times to ask the crowd to listen, but they just screamed louder. Police had to keep the fans from rushing the stage. At the end of the second show, a hysterical girl broke through the police line and rushed Elvis. She was carried back to her seat, but it set off a frenzy. Teenage girls rushed the stage, and Elvis was whisked away in a police car. Elvis's success, he said, was due to his faith. He advised young singers to have faith like he did. The shows in Houston were well controlled, with no stampedes or injuries. In San Antonio, the Bexar County Coliseum was a different story. The police called in extra troops to handle the mob of excited fans. Women arrived hours early, standing on their chairs and watching the Bronco Gate, hoping to catch a glimpse of their idol. The chaos was intense, but it made Kay smile. This was the kind of madness she loved. The show was just getting started, and the audience was already on the edge of their seats. The gate creaked open, and a roar of screams filled the air. Girls pulled out their hair, crying and wringing their hands in agony. The police formed a human barricade to hold back the surging crowd, but it was just a false alarm. A little man with a broom and dustpan sauntered out to clean up the trash. The crowd drooped in disappointment, but their eyes remained fixed on the stage, waiting for the real star to appear. The MC stepped onto the stage, but the 6,000 fans were so excited that they could barely hear him. He announced that Bexar County Coliseum was proud to present Elvis Presley, and the crowd erupted again. The MC tried to calm them down and introduce the other acts, but the teenagers were only interested in one thing, Elvis. The first act started, and the crowd sat dejectedly, clapping politely but keeping their eyes peeled for any sign of Elvis. They watched the other performers, but their hearts weren't in it. They just wanted to see the man who made them scream and cry. Finally, after an hour and a half, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. Elvis stepped onto the stage, dressed in a black suit with a white t-shirt and white bucks. He stood straddle-legged, wiggling his hips as the crowd went wild. Fans fell to their knees, beating their palms and heads against the floor. One girl in a pink dress, Elvis's signature color, screamed, "I want him, I just want to touch him." Tears streamed down her cheeks. Elvis was the picture of calm amidst the chaos. He leaned over the microphone, laughed, and said, "I'd like to do a song." But the screams were so loud that only the music could be heard. The faster he moved, the more frenzied his fans became. A few girls rushed the stage and were quickly escorted out. One girl was so hysterical that she didn't even remember her own name. Elvis finished his last number, and the fans pressed closer to the stage. He gyrated off the stage and jumped into a waiting car, leaving rubber streaks as he sped away. The escape took just 8 seconds, but it felt like an eternity to his fans. Hundreds of girls mobbed the dressing room door, chanting, "We want Elvis." They refused to believe he had gone, even as the Coliseum emptied out. Earlier that day, 75 members of Elvis's fan club had been waiting at the Coliseum since 7. They chanted and cheered, determined to see their idol. When Elvis finally arrived, he was calm, friendly, and cooperative. He hugged fan club presidents, answered questions, posed for pictures, and signed autographs. He told the press, "I'm just doing the best I can. I let each day take care of itself." When asked about his success, he said, "It kind of scares you." The evening show was a repeat of the afternoon's madness. The crowd was just as wild, and Elvis was just as captivating. After the show, some fans collapsed on the floor, exhausted but content. They had seen their hero, and it was worth every moment of the wait. Sherry Davis, the opening act, had a tough job. She was used to performing old-time country tunes, but the rock and roll crowd was a different beast. At the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, she had to play nonstop to keep the 26,000 fans from going wild. She managed to survive, but the next night in Waco, the crowd seemed like a warm-up. In Houston, she had to bar the door to keep the fans from breaking in. On the road to San Antonio, Tom Diskin, Elvis's right-hand man, introduced Sherry to the king. She was surprised to find that he was polite and appreciative. Later, Elvis visited her dressing room to apologize for the rush at the press conference. He planted a kiss on her cheek before she shooed him out. After the show, Gordon Stoker, one of the Jordanaires, took Sherry to the Alamo. Though it was closed, they strolled the paths and read the plaques. When they returned to the car, a police officer noticed that it had no license plates. Gordon explained that the fans had stolen them, thinking the car might belong to Elvis. The officer let them go, but the next day, the colonel had to trade in his graffiti-covered Cadillac for a new one. Back at the motel, Sherry and Gordon discussed scripture by the pool. Nick Adams, Elvis's friend, swung down from the balcony, making chimpanzee noises. Sherry was not amused and retreated to her room. Later, Elvis asked her to come up to his room. Nick apologized for his behavior, and Elvis gazed into her eyes, whispering, "You're a good lady." Elvis's charm was hard to resist, even for someone as tough as Sherry. But she knew that the road to fame was long and unpredictable, and she had her own dreams to chase. For now, she was just glad to have survived her first week on the road with the king of rock and roll. Elvis and Sherry walked to the balcony, the night air cool and the pool lights shimmering like stars. She accepted his arm, feeling a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Well, don't ever change," Elvis said, his voice gentle. "Without my faith, I wouldn't be where I am." Sherry looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "And where would that be?" she asked, studying his introverted expression. Elvis offered her his arm, and she reluctantly took it. They strolled to the balcony and leaned over the railing, the lights of the pool casting a gentle glow. A drunken fan stumbled over, asking if they had seen Elvis. He turned to the woman, looking her straight in the eye. No recognition lit her face, he thought. Without a word, Elvis pointed across the walkway, and the woman wobbled off in that direction. A few minutes later, she returned. "Hey, he's not there," she slurred. "I don't know how you missed him. He just went by on the way to the pool," Elvis told her, once again searching her eyes for recognition. She mumbled her thanks, the alcohol nearly toppling him over the railing. What a handsome couple they would have made, Sherry thought, remembering the recent re-release of her recordings on the Gals of the Big D Jamboree CD. Elvis walked her to her room, stopping at the entrance. He gave her a brotherly peck on the cheek and told her to stay sweet. She thanked him and started to close the door, but noticed his feet. He wore crocheted booties made by one of the Jordanaires' wives, but his big toe stuck out of a little hole in the top. "Hey, nice slippers," she said, closing the door with a smile. Elvis's first movie, Love Me Tender, hit theaters in November. The lines were so long that parents reminisced about the days of Gone with the Wind. Kids cut class to stand outside in the cold. just to see the man who would become a millionaire in a year. In Texas, the October 14th performance in San Antonio was the last time he played in the state for 15 years. In Fort Worth, fans braved 25-degree weather, lining up as early as 3 a.m. to get a seat at the Worth Theater. They brought sandwiches and entertained each other with songs and dances. The girls wore Presley-themed outfits, and the boys, like Jackie Hunter, showed their support too. When asked why they were so dedicated, the answers ranged from "he's cute" to "he understands our problems." Elvis's fame didn't shield him from the draft. In 1957, he was inducted into the Army. 500 girls sobbed their goodbyes at his induction in Memphis, and the scene repeated at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, where his iconic pompadour met the barber's scissors. "Hair today, gone tomorrow," he joked, but the girls only cried harder. At Fort Hood, Texas, Elvis became Private Presley. He went through basic training with 6,000 other soldiers, enduring grueling exercises and long marches. Despite initial teasing, he earned respect by performing his duties and even adding his own rhythm to the cadence. He excelled in marksmanship and won several awards. The Army assigned him to the quieter Jeep Division after his eardrum was damaged by the sound of field artillery. Elvis's weekends were a mix of visits to the Faddle home in Waco and girl watching at the Quality Inn in Fort Worth. He even outran a group of fans in his Lincoln Continental, reaching 90 mph before a police officer pulled him over. The officer let him off with a laugh, and the fans celebrated their catch. In Waco, Elvis found a true refuge at the Faddle home. Eddie Faddle, a DJ and old friend, built a pink room for him, complete with recording equipment and a custom stereo. Elvis spent weekends with the family, singing and playing with the kids. He kept up with the music industry, listening to new records and enjoying the simple pleasures of home. Elvis's time in the Army showed a different side of him, a man who could blend in and stand out all at once. Despite the fame, he remained grounded, always finding a way to connect with the people around him. Whether it was a peck on the cheek or a playful chase in a car, Elvis Presley never lost his touch. Elvis Presley's journey through Texas was filled with unforgettable moments and passionate fans. As the news spread that the 2nd Armored Division would be heading to Germany, the excitement and despair were palpable. Girls and reporters were desperate to know where Elvis was going. Some even tried to convince him to stay in their towns. But when the Army announced that it would be Germany, the reaction was dramatic. Thousands of fans were heartbroken, fearing that he would be forgotten in a foreign land. In Germany, Elvis became a sensation. The German fans, curious about this American heartthrob, quickly fell in love with him. His charm and talent transcended language barriers, and he soon became a beloved figure in his new home. Meanwhile, back in the States, his popularity continued to grow. Reporters kept a close eye on him, and his music and movies kept his fans engaged and excited. Before he left, Elvis had a farewell party at the Faddles' house. The night was filled with laughter, music, and goodbyes. Hundreds of well-wishers gathered outside, and Elvis, being the kind and humble person he was, invited them all in. He shook hands, danced, and made everyone feel special. Early the next morning, a large crowd watched as Elvis and his platoon boarded a train to New York, and then on to Germany. Despite the initial worry, Elvis's career flourished during his time abroad. When he returned to the United States, he was more famous than ever. He continued to make movies tour, and record some of his most iconic songs. Even though he didn't perform in Texas for many years, his connection to the state remained strong. Texas had been a place where he grew, and where he made countless memories. The story of Elvis in Texas is a testament to his impact and the enduring love of his fans. From small towns to big cities, he left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who saw him perform. His legacy continues to inspire and captivate people around the world, and his time in Texas remains a cherished part of his incredible journey.